Desmond Okoro was 41 years old, a marine engineer who had spent his career keeping other people's vessels from sinking and had never once left a job half-finished. He drove a truck that was 8 years old and ran clean because he rebuilt the engine himself on the weekends. He wore the same deck boots he'd worn for 4 years, resoled once, because they still had good tread left in them. That summer, on a marina pier at the edge of a town where his wife's family kept their reputation polished, she pulled his wedding ring off his finger in front of her sister and her new friends, told him he'd always been too small for the life she wanted, and threw the ring into the harbor. She laughed when it hit the water. She was still laughing when 110 feet of white steel came around the breakwater and slowed to a stop in the channel directly behind her. The people on the pier went quiet. She didn't understand yet whose yacht it was. She had no idea how wrong she was about the man she'd just thrown away. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The boatyard was still dark when Desmond pulled in. No sunrise yet, just the low slap of water against the hulls and the cold coming off the bay. He filled his thermos in the truck and screwed the lid tight. He had a refit going in the far bay, a 60-foot trawler with a cracked stringer that 2 other engineers had called unsalvageable, and he liked to walk the yard before the crews arrived, when the boats were just problems, waiting for someone patient enough to solve them. He stood at the edge of the dry dock and looked at the hull braced above him and thought, the way he always thought, about how a thing holds together and what it takes to make it hold. He did not yet know that the same question was about to be asked of his own life. He only knew the work, and the work was honest, and that had always been enough. Desmond had spent 18 years building a name in a trade where the name was the only thing that crossed the water with you. Captains requested him by reputation. When a yard couldn't figure out why a vessel listed, his was the call they made at 2 in the morning. He had worked his way from apprentice to the engineer that boat builders quietly consulted before they finalized a design, and 4 years earlier he had taken an ownership stake in the yard itself when the old owner retired without an heir. He had also, the year his uncle passed and left him more than the family understood, commissioned a hull of his own, a long-range expedition yacht he'd helped design line by line, kept under a holding company's name at a yard 3 harbors down, finished but never flaunted. Renata knew none of it. He had never told her the yard was partly his. Never told her about the hull, because she had decided early what Desmond was, a man with grease under his nails and a truck that smelled of diesel, and a man like that did not own yachts. He had let her believe it. It hadn't been a secret so much as a thing she never thought to ask. He didn't know it then, but she had been planning her exit for over a year. She had just been waiting for the summer, and the audience, and the right pier to do it on. The day she threw the ring, they were at her family's marina for the regatta her parents hosted every July. Renata had spent the week being someone Desmond didn't quite recognize, brighter, sharper, performing for a circle of new friends who summered there and measured people by the length of their boats. There was a man among them named Tristan, who owned a chartered 50-footer he liked to call the smaller of mine, and who had been standing close to Renata all week in a way Desmond had logged the way he logged a stress fracture, noted, not yet reacted to. On the pier, in front of all of them, she took his hand as if to make peace, and instead worked the ring off his finger. "You've always been too small for this life, Desmond," she said, and the words came out smooth, rehearsed, the rhythm of something said into a mirror. "I deserve more than a man who smells like an engine room. I'm being honest. Finally, I want a life that's actually going somewhere." She held the ring up so the circle could see. Then she threw it in a high, careless arc into the harbor, and laughed, and the sound carried over the water. Desmond did not lunge for it. He didn't shout. He set his coffee cup down on the piling, slowly, the way he set down anything he intended to pick up again. He watched the spot where the ring had gone under, and he noted, without expression, that she had thrown it toward the channel rather than the shallows, as if even her cruelty wanted the water deep. He noticed Tristan's hand find the small of her back. He noticed her sister filming on a phone held low, as if this had been arranged to be remembered. He filed all of it away. He didn't decide yet what it meant. "All right," he said. That was all. Her smile faltered at the size of the word, because she'd prepared for a scene and gotten a closed valve instead. What Desmond had built, over the 6 years of the marriage, was not the standing on that pier. He understood that now. What he'd built was a habit of giving Renata the smallest version of himself she'd let him be. The quiet one. The one who didn't mention the yard. The one who let her tell her family he fixed boats, because the truth bored her. He had engineered the best life he could for her, and asked for almost nothing back, and she'd read the asking for nothing as proof there was nothing there. 3 years before, when her interior design business stalled, he had quietly moved $70,000 through the household account to keep her suppliers paid, and she had told her sister she'd managed it herself. He had let her have that too. He had a long history of letting her have things. His aunt Imelda had watched all of it. She was 70, small, with silver hair pinned close, and reading glasses on a beaded chain. She had never said a word against Renata, because Imelda was the kind of woman who waited to be asked. She kept the little house near the boatyard that Desmond had bought back into the family the year his uncle died, and her kitchen smelled of coffee and cedar, and something sweet always cooling on the counter. She was the one person in his world who said his name like it had weight. That was what Renata had never understood. Until the summer everything turned, Imelda had been the only person counting on his side. He went to her that evening. He sat at her table and ate, because she made him, and the quiet of her kitchen did what the marina's noise never had. She watched him over the glasses. She knew the look of a man absorbing a load below the waterline, where it doesn't show. "You'll want to call Walter," she said after a while. Walter was the attorney who'd handled the holding company's filings for 15 years. "It's a divorce," Desmond said. "She wants out. I'm not going to fight her for it." Imelda folded her hands. "Eat first," she said. "Then listen." She told him then what she'd been watching from the edges of the family gatherings all year. Tristan had not appeared this summer. He'd been around since the previous fall, when Renata had begun taking weekend trips she didn't explain. Imelda had a memory for faces and a notebook for things that didn't fit. Black cover, spiral bound. She set it on the table and opened it. The first entry was dated in October. Neat handwriting, date, the man, the marina where she'd seen them, the name on the transom of his chartered boat. Below it, a photograph taken on her phone through a calf window. Renata and Tristan. In the month Renata had told Desmond she just needed some space to breathe. "There's more," Imelda said. "But it can wait until you've talked to Walter." He called Walter at 7 the next morning. Walter's voice was even, unhurried, the voice of a man who'd carried weight before. Desmond asked him 2 things: where the marital finances actually stood, and whether the holding company's vessel was clear. Walter already knew both answers. He drafted them. The expedition yacht, the hull Desmond had designed and finished, was held outright by the holding company, no lien, clean title, registered 3 harbors down, where no one from Renata's circle ever looked. It had never been a marital asset. It had been Desmond's separate property since before the keel was laid, built with money from his uncle's estate that he'd kept walled off, not from suspicion, but from habit, the same way he kept a circuit isolated until he knew it was safe to close. "There's something else," Walter said. "About Tristan. You'll want to be sitting down for the irony." It turned out, Tristan did not own the 50-footer he called the smaller of mine. He chartered it by the week, and he was behind on the charter fees, and the company he ran, a yacht management outfit that promised wealthy owners he'd handle their vessels and their slips and their crews, was quietly insolvent. He'd been telling Renata's family circle that he managed a fleet. What he actually managed was a growing stack of unpaid invoices and a reputation he polished the way Renata polished hers. He had attached himself to Renata because she carried herself like money, and she had attached herself to him because he carried himself like more. Desmond spread it all on Imelda's table. The notebook. The photographs dated back to October. The clean title on the yacht that was his alone. The charter records Walter had pulled, showing Tristan owned nothing he claimed to own. He stood over the whole of it the way he stood over a vessel in dry dock, not looking at any single piece, looking at all of it together, feeling where the lines connected and where the load truly sat. Renata had not left him for a wealthier man. She had thrown his ring in the ocean to perform an upgrade to a man with less than nothing, in front of an audience, on a pier, for a phone held low. And she had done it without ever once asking what the man she was discarding actually had. He could see the whole shape of it now. He didn't move fast. That was the part neither of them would ever account for. Renata had spent 6 years deciding what kind of man Desmond was, and she had been wrong about the only thing that mattered. She had mistaken his patience for the absence of capability. It wasn't. Patience was the most practiced skill he had. It was the one she'd never had a reason to watch him use. If he'd wanted fast, he could have brought the yacht around the breakwater the same afternoon and let the size of it answer her in front of everyone. One arrival. Done. But an arrival in anger was a scene, and scenes could be dismissed. He wanted the truth to land in order, with documents, in a room where it couldn't be laughed off. Proceedings could not be dismissed. There was a financial layer, the way there always is. Walter found it. In the months Renata had been taking her unexplained weekends, she had moved money, small amounts at first, then larger, out of the household account into a partnership account that turned out to belong to Tristan's failing management company. $48,000 across the spring, framed in her own notes as investments in a fleet that did not exist. She had been bailing out the leaking boat of the man she was leaving him for, using the money Desmond earned the same quiet way Desmond had once bailed out her business. She had learned the trick of moving money from the only man who'd ever done it gently for her. She had simply pointed it the other direction. Desmond read the transfer record once. Then he folded it in half and in half again and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. He let the divorce proceed exactly as Renata had filed it, agreeing to the terms she'd drafted, because every term was based on a picture of his worth that was already false. He had Walter prepare the dissolution to close on her schedule. He understood sequencing. You don't refloat a hull before you've sealed the breach. Quietly, he had the yacht brought up from 3 harbors down and moored where it would be ready. He set one meeting for the morning the dissolution accounting would be reviewed, attorneys present, in a marina conference room that overlooked the same channel she'd thrown his ring into. "She thinks this is already over," Desmond said. Imelda said nothing. She refilled his coffee. He called Renata near the end. His voice was even cooperative. He said he wanted to settle the financial review without it getting ugly, that he'd meet her and the attorneys at the marina office and bring the last of the paperwork. She agreed before he finished the sentence. He could hear the relief she was trying to keep out of her voice and mostly failing. She thought he was coming to sign away what little she imagined he had. He set the phone face down on Imelda's table. Desmond arrived 40 minutes early. On any vessel, the engineer who boards last is already behind. The marina conference room had a long table, neutral walls, and a wall of glass that looked straight out over the channel and the breakwater beyond. Walter arrived at 9:40 with a forensic accountant named Adeyemi, who laid 3 folders in a row and squared their edges. The water outside was flat and bright. The room was still, the kind of still that comes before a thing, not after it. They came in together, Renata and Tristan, and that was the first signal. Renata moved into the room with the ease of a woman who believed it already belonged to her. She glanced at Desmond once, a quick, professional assessment, and then looked past him to Walter, as if Desmond were just another man the lawyers had brought along. Tristan followed, in a blazer that cost more than the truth he stood on, already extending a hand, already smiling the smile he used like a tool. "Thank you all for coming," Walter said. "Before any discussion, there are several matters that require acknowledgement by all parties." He opened the first folder and laid the documents down one at a time, unhurried. "This is the record of transfers from the marital household account," Walter said, "to a partnership controlled by Mr. Tristan Vey's management company. $48,000 between March and June, undisclosed, characterized in Mrs. Okoro's own notes as investments in a fleet." He let the figures sit. "The accounting will reflect these as marital funds dissipated without authorization." Tristan's smile did the thing it had not done all summer. It stopped working. Adeyemi placed the second document on the table. Walter walked it through, factual, not cold, simply precise. The charter records for the 50-footer Tristan called his own. The unpaid fees, the insolvency of the management company, the fleet that existed only in conversation. Renata's expression had not changed, or rather, she had worked to keep it from changing, and the effort was visible to anyone watching closely enough. Desmond was watching closely enough. Then Walter set down the last folder. "There is a final matter," he said, "concerning the separate property of Mr. Okoro, relevant only because the dissolution requires the court to understand his full standing." He slid a single page across the table. It carried the registration and clean title of a 110-foot expedition yacht, held by a holding company, principal listed in one line. Desmond Okoro. This vessel predates and stands apart from the marriage. We disclose it now solely for completeness of the record. The silence in the room lasted 11 seconds. Desmond counted them. Renata read the page twice. He watched her read it twice. Something moved across her face that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite recognition. It was the specific look of a person realizing a structure they'd built was sitting on the wrong foundation and had been the whole time. Through the glass behind her, white steel was coming slow around the breakwater, the same hull she'd had her back to on the pier, and a few heads in the room turned toward it. She had thrown his ring into that channel laughing, certain she was discarding a small man. The page in front of her said the yacht in the window was his, that she had been bankrolling a sinking man with the money of the one she'd thrown away, and that she had performed the whole thing for an audience that was about to understand it too. Her hand came up to her mouth. Her eyes filled, and she did not blink them clear. Tristan had already pushed his chair back from the table and was no longer looking at her. "You'll want a few minutes with counsel," Walter said. Desmond stood. He gathered nothing from the table. He had brought only himself, and that had served its purpose. He buttoned his jacket. He shook Walter's hand and Adeyemi's. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned back to Renata, and he said it quietly, only for her, not as performance. because it was meant for her. You threw away the ring because you thought it was the most valuable thing I'd ever give you, Desmond said. You never once asked what else I was carrying. He walked out without looking back. It did not happen all at once. Without the money Renata had been quietly feeding it, Tristan's management company missed the next round of charter fees, and the 50-footer he'd called his own was repossessed by the company he'd never paid. And the circle that had summered around him began to summer elsewhere. He left the marina before August was out. Renata kept the cars and the household account and the furniture she believed was hers, exactly as she'd demanded in the filing, and learned they did not add up to the life she'd performed on the pier. The dissolution accounting charged the dissipated funds against her share, and the number got smaller. The friends who'd applauded her that day began letting her calls go to voicemail. She was not ruined in any loud way. She was simply smaller. She carried the weight of what she had chosen the way a person carries something they cannot set down. Not dramatically, just constantly. Desmond did not parade the yacht. He kept working. The cracked stringer trawler that 2 engineers had given up on came back into the water that fall, sound, and the captain shook his hand on the dock and meant it. He answered every call the same day. He gave accurate timelines and hit them. He had a diver he trusted go down off the Regatta Pier one quiet morning, and the man came up with the ring after 20 minutes in the silt, and Desmond did not put it back on. He set it in a small dish on Imelda's windowsill, where it caught the light, because some things are worth keeping even when they're done being worn. 14 months later, on a cool evening in early October, Desmond sat on the aft deck of the expedition yacht with a glass of water, moored quiet in the bay with no audience and nothing to prove. Imelda's voice came from the galley, asking if he wanted the last of the cobbler. His thermos sat on the rail, filled for the morning, dented on one side. The water moved gold and then gray as the light went, and the lights of the town came up across the harbor. He didn't think about the pier, or the laugh, or the channel. He thought about the boatyard at 6, the next hull waiting, the work. He finished his water. He went below and turned out the light. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.